Much. Cheers, Jay. It's all right for Jay to speak for 3 minutes and say, told you we didn't need a mic. I've got like an hour and 40, apparently. I'm going to have to shout the whole time. So it is good to be here. It's always nice to be back in Liverpool. Believe it or not, I am actually from Liverpool originally. I was born and raised in Kenny, and then as soon as I could, if I'm honest, I got out, and then I spent the rest of the time living everywhere else in the world. But it is always good to come back. And tonight, I'm going to talk about a lot of things, really. The health protocol, which is like our key lineup of 3 products, but not in a salesy way, it's in an explanation way. I'm actually going to talk about health for the majority of it, and then put that into context, because that's really what I do and what I've done. Working for a commercial organization, this still feels brand new to me. And the only reason I did it is that I was brought on board as a research specialist, which was to make sure that the research evidence influenced their product development, which they were already excellent at. They didn't really need me, to be honest with you. But it was to take a role in that, and then things kind of evolved, as they typically do. And then shortly after I'd been there about 18 months, I was appointed as the Chief Product Officer, and I now lead the product team, which is a huge privilege. But my background, it goes back a solid 30 years, which is working in high-performance sport. I've worked on 4 Olympic pathways, so it was Beijing, London, Rio, Tokyo. So working with athletes who've participated in those games, either as an exercise physiologist, as a nutritionist, as a strength and conditioning coach. I've worked in professional rugby, gone to World Cups and been head of performance for some big teams. I've worked in Premiership football, and I'm an environmental physiologist. And that's normally the point at which people say, well, what's one of them? So I've trained and prepared people to climb Everest, to row across the Atlantic, to run across the Sahara Desert. All the kind of stuff that, certainly your age group, typically men reach 45, 50. They've got a nice car, they've got a nice house, everything's great, and they go, right, what's next? So they want to climb Everest, or they want to row across the ocean, they want to do something else to fund their ego. And in an endeavor to keep them alive or prepare them to do that, they get involved with people like me, who do the nutrition, do the acclimation. So I've really spent a big part of my career having huge amounts of fun doing those kind of things. And I spent 6 years as a clinical exercise physiologist. And that is singularly one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, because that was whereby every single day I was helping people who were recovering from cancer, cardiovascular disease, various types of musculoskeletal disorders, weight loss for surgery, everything that happens in a big hospital. I was in charge of a team that looked after all of those kind of aspects when it came to rehabilitation or to get you ready for an operation. The problem I had when I was working in that role was that I'd spent a lot of time in sport, and I knew how we did things at that kind of upper end. So when you were good at a sport, you would get selected, and then you enter what we call pathway. You've got a talent, or you've practiced really, really hard, is the truth. And then they say, right then, we're going to invest a load of money in you, and we're going to coach you, and we're going to develop you, because you might get us a gold medal at the Olympics. And I don't know if you know this, but the average cost of a gold medal is around about 5 million. It costs 5 million whether you get a medal or not, but it's huge investment. And because I had such an amount of experience of doing that, and also my interest in nutrition had started wide, I was always interested in human nutrition, not sports nutrition. When I was working in a hospital, for the first 3 years, I just kept thinking, why are people doing this? Why are people living this way? Why aren't they getting this advice? Why don't they know this? Why don't they do that? And literally every day was a learning day, and a day to be shocked by what people didn't know. And it wasn't just the patients, to be honest with you. I used to be appalled. I was at a big district general hospital, and I would be appalled when I'd go out at lunchtime for a run, and all I could see were plumes of smoke as the consultants and the doctors and the nurses took to their break time. And I was like, wow, this is health. This is health. And so all of that led me back to research. And then from there, I've worked on projects like the GM Health Innovations, which is a global strategy looking at how we can improve health and how health is done. I've worked with Active Cheshire. I've been a part of the city's change in diabetes, which is a global strategy. In COVID, I was brought in as a part of the post-COVID strategy to develop the new roles to manage people who had long COVID. So I've maintained this link with health. But COVID is a fundamental part in why I'm at Zinzino, because I'm guessing you all remember COVID. Yeah? No? Is everyone still got PTSD? It wasn't that long ago. COVID shut the world down. Do you all know why we had to shut the world down because of COVID? Anyone ever get? You know what, I lecture, I've still got PhD students, I'm still a professor at UCLan University, and any group of people you speak to are reluctant to answer questions. Be brave. Do you know why? It happened to all of you. You should know. This is your life story. Why did we shut the world down? Contamination, contagion, this virus that was out there. Yep, everyone terrified, face masks. Who knew that people needed to be told that when you've been in the toilet, you should wash your hands? That was a learning point. Why did we shut the world down, though? There's loads of viruses. There's viruses now. There's flus going around right now. Why did we shut the world down for COVID?
Beds, hospital beds.
Yeah, but why?
Not enough of them.
Why didn't we have enough?
Because people are getting so sick that the system can't cope with them.
No. That's what the newspapers told you.
People were already unhealthy.
People were already unhealthy. Too many people in the world were already too sick, and along came a virus that took advantage of that. And it wasn't the fact that people would get sick, it was the fact that so many people would be sick at the same time. That's why we had too few hospital beds. That was the problem. The virus itself, as clever as it is and as clever as it was nothing remarkable. The problem was too many people were already sick. And comorbidities, people started to understand it. So people with cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, certain types of cancers, obesity, we're all in this big risk category. And all the health boards in the world had to look around and go, we can't cope. Because when you look over your shoulder, you go, if they all get this at the same time, we're done. And so we shut the world down. But when we shut the world down, I stopped having to commute 100 miles a day. The weather was amazing, do you remember? When it started, I was at home, shorts and a t-shirt. I kept a shirt on standby in case I had to jump on a Zoom, just ready. And I was working away on a couple of research projects. And believe it or not, one of them was about omega-3. Because we've known all about omega-3 for the longest time. There's nothing new about omega-3. It's an essential nutrient. It's a key indicator to your health status, all this good stuff. The problem we had with omega-3 was that, one, people just don't consume enough. That's going to be a prevailing theme tonight. Secondly, it's hard to do so even when you try. It's cost prohibitive. There's lots of challenges around getting a sufficient amount of omega-3, the right type. And then, and this is the big one, most supplements don't work. And so when I was tasked with this problem, how do you fix the omega-3 deficiency, which in 2018, the Office of Global Burden made an estimate. And the Office of Global Burden is a centralized statistical organization. They quantify health data. It informs the World Health Organization. And they said, our estimate is, at best, 6.3 billion people are living with an omega-3 deficiency. So ideally, we need to do something about it. And so, all the way back in the 1970s and 80s, my mum, who came from Dublin, as most people's mum did, she took cod liver oil. And she knew nothing about nutrition, but she knew that cod liver oil had benefits. And so my first impulse, and I was well aware of the supplement industry, was like, okay, let's look at supplements of omega-3. But in 2018, there was also a landmark peer-reviewed meta-analysis by the Cochrane Institute that said, you know what? Most omega-3 supplements don't do anything. Doesn't make any difference. So we had this problem. Now, the next part of this story, as unlikely as it is the reason why I'm at Zinzino. So I was at home, trying to figure this out, thinking who are the best researchers in our network that we can get to look at this. And the phone rings. And he's not in the room right now. Sometimes his wife is. And it was a guy called Tony O'Neill. And at that time, he was really high up in an American sports clothing brand called Under Armour. You've probably heard of them. And he called me up out of the blue and does what most people do. You've probably done this to people like me. So first of all, you pretend to be interested. You go, hey, Carl, how are you? You want to get past that bit as quick as you can because you're about to ask for a favor. Hey, Carl, how are you? Yeah, I'm all right, yeah, not bad. What is it you'd like? My doctor in the States has told me I should take a supplement. I was like, okay. Omega-3. By the way, Tony had some health challenges earlier on, so there was a good reason for him to be looking at this stuff. An omega-3 supplement. I was like, they don't work. He said, well, this one's different. Everybody says that. Everybody says that. Isn't that the truth? Everybody selling anything tells you that theirs is different. I was like, okay. He goes, have you ever heard of a company called Zinzino? I said, no. But I promise you now, if it's an omega-3 supplement, it's unlikely to work. And he said, well, listen, when you have a look at it for me, you're my go-to nutrition guy. If you say it's rubbish, then I won't touch you. And so I did, purely because it was lockdown, I had plenty of time, it was interesting, I'd never heard of it, and I thought I'll take a look. And so what you've got to bear in mind is I'd been canvassing and surveying omega-3 supplements for the longest time, and I knew why they didn't work. And then I loaded up a page, saw this thing called Balance Oil, and immediately I recognized how clever it was. And so that's the truth as to why I joined. And then Jay kind of told the truth, because I don't know if you know this, but in sport, is anyone with a sport background, like working in sports performance? In sport, like omega-3 is the golden goose. And back in 2005, I was at Liverpool John Moores University. We were working with Everton, Liverpool, Man United on nutrition strategies. And our professor then is an incredible guy, Don McLaren, who's written more research papers and books than you can shake a stick at. We were trying to crack the omega-3 code, because if you have a sufficient amount of omega-3 and you're a sports person, you get 4 measurable profound benefits. First of all, you get a better anabolic response, so you build more muscle tissue. Secondly, you break down less muscle tissue. Thirdly, you get less muscle soreness related to exercise and competitive training. And fourth, which was an emerging factor back then, but has since been built on, is it increases cognitive function. So back then to us, we were really trying to get it, and we were working with big teams and individuals, and we were doing what everyone else does. And we were getting them to take more and more of a standard supplement, and we couldn't change anything. And so once I'd seen this, which I'll come to later on, the first thing I did was call a load of people who were working in sport and saying, listen, I think I've got something you want to start using with your athletes and troops. And I had nothing to do with Zinzino, wasn't getting a commission, nothing to do with it at all. But I think this is something you need to pay attention to. And so all the while, people like Jay and Tony, who was on the phone to me, and other people, they think that it was me saying this is great that was the convincing bit. What they don't know is I sat back for about 8 weeks whilst they were all implementing this with their athletes and teams and squads, and they were phoning me and going, what is in this stuff? Is it legal? Is it informed sport? Because the results we're seeing are remarkable. And that was the game changer. And so that is, in a way, a long story from the kind of start all the way up to why I joined Zinzino. And now what I'm going to do is take the focus off anything to do with me, and we're going to look at health. And there's a lot of information on these slides, so feel free to take a picture of it, make a note. It's entirely up to you as to how you learn. But there is a lot of information. If I say anything that you wholeheartedly disagree with, put your hand up and tell me why. I'm happy to have a debate, a conversation around it, because all of this is up for debate. But all of this is also, as far as I'm concerned, impartial. It doesn't matter whether I'm a chief product officer, nothing. I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist. That's what I am. That's how I define myself. I'm an exercise and nutrition scientist. To this day, I still work on experiments, lab-based. I still produce research. I still work with some huge, big research partners. That's what I do. This is an objective look at health on a broad scale. And you'll know just how much of this impacts on you. Are you ready? Eyes down for a full house. Let's hope this works, because it's through that door. So we'll see the power of, yep, there we go. Fantastic. So here we go. Let's set the scene. Let's have a look at the world in which we live and the reality of it. So your path to better health, first of all, as with any situation, whether you're trying to improve your fitness, it's January, most people jump on the bus and they go, this is it, new year, new me, I'm going to join the gym, I'm going to buy some trainers and all that good stuff. So you've got to look at what the challenge is and what it is you've got to overcome. So today's challenges is that we've got information overload about diet and health, and how do you navigate it? You know, I really struggle and I look at social media less because it frustrates me. The amount of people who are gobbing off and saying things with such conviction that it creates false truths because people buy into it. And I regularly meet people who say, yeah, but such and such says this. And that's a regular feature of my life. And often these people have no background, very little experience, they've done a little bit in fitness, or they're an ex-bodybuilder who took copious amounts of drugs, and then they stopped doing that, and suddenly they're stood in Aldi saying, don't eat this, it's crap. It's like, great. You know what I mean? We're not all going to go down your route, mate. So it's hard, isn't it? And also, and I say this a lot, like back in the 90s, which was a phenomenal time, you have highs and lows in your career. At the time I was earning the least money was one of the best times, and you'll understand why. I was out in the States, working at Gold's Gym, Venice Beach, and it was the 90s. It was amazing. I had an amazing time. That's as much of the story as I'm going to share. But what I will say is, like, I was training 3 times a day and had a diet that mostly consisted of chicken and a bit of rice. And so you pack on a bit of muscle. I'd just come off the back of playing rugby, realized I wasn't good enough to turn pro, whilst loads of my mates did. So I was in good shape, and I didn't know anything. I was blagging it. Even when I got out there, I said, yeah, I've been a PT back in the UK for 5 years. Can I have a job? And they're like, oh, yeah, great. I was just winging it. I wanted experience, and I wanted to be in there. But people listened to me more then because you're packing a bit of muscle and you got that look. People think you must know what you're on about. I didn't. I just lifted heavy things and ate chicken. That was it. And got by. And the same is true now. You'll see people, influencers, on those channels with a tight top on who are saying, you just got to do this, got to do that. And it's all nonsense. So it's hard. It's hard to know what's true. We've got an increase in lifestyle diseases, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity. We have a real serious problem with obesity. And I'm going to spend a bit of time on it in a moment. But the problem we've got is it's a gateway disease. And then you have comedians who I love, actually, like Ricky Gervais, who say things like it's not a disease, and they belittle it and how people become obese. Obesity, once it's systemic, is disease. So it has a pathology to it. And it's a gateway disease because if you're obese, you are quadrupling your risk of certain types of cancers, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. And that's just the top 4. And so it is a disease. And we have a huge issue. Why? Because if you mention it, people say, you can't body shame me. And I go, I'm not interested in what you look like. I'm just trying to save your life. So it's a hard nut to crack. And then we are nowhere near meeting the guideline requirements for physical activity. Nowhere near. In fact, people are doing less and less every year. How many steps do we encourage you to take per day? Everyone knows. Everyone knows. Not everyone's doing it. And yet everyone I meet goes, I do. Every day, most days. Every day, most days, some days. Yeah.
Where did that number come from?
Well, actually, it attributes to amount of time because it averages a certain distance, which is around about 8 kilometers. So it's an amount of time rather than the steps itself. And then it relates to what we call your kind of active thermogenesis. So it's really, and it's actually, it's quite, and I'm often cynical about the 10,000 steps per day. And I take the mickey out of it a lot. But even in my book, I recommend people to do it because it really is. You walk your way into health, and 10,000 steps a day for those who can walk is a surefire way to do it. It's profound. It's way more profound than exercising. 70% of non-communicable diseases can be prevented. Fact. So the majority of what we're dealing with in the world could be prevented if people just modified their lifestyle choices. Diet and lifestyle are the keys to better health. This is where we get into Zincino's health protocol, because as a nutritionist, and I'm a food-first nutritionist, I want you all to make better food choices, but it's hard, and I'm going to go through that. And what we do with it is that we cover the omega-3 need, we look at your gut, which is the center of the human system, and then we look at the fundamentals of vitamins and minerals. Today's goal is to make you reflect as I talk about all this, and I talk about other people. You are the only person who knows how much of it relates to you. And I want you to think about your health status. Explore what a healthy lifestyle actually entails, and learn how small changes, work on the minimums, not the maximums. One of the things I dislike about this time of year is that everyone takes to social media and they promise huge things. And I don't know if you know this, but statistically, if you start a new regime on the 1st of January, do you know what your likelihood of success is? Not zero, come on. There's always someone. 0.7%. Phenomenal, isn't it? 0.7. So the best thing to do is not start on the 1st of January. You're already going to increase your chances of success. And the reason being often is because people get carried away and they promise big things. This is the year I'm going to lose 10 stone. This is the year I'm going to do that marathon. And it's always huge. Do something small. Be really, really consistent. Consistency is key. You are the outcome of the things that you do most often, not those boom and bust once in a while. So we're going to look at all this stuff, and time's against me because I've waffled on with the intro. But let's have a look. The top's in Norwegian, because I presented this last to Norwegians. So non-communicable diseases constitute one of the biggest health challenges in the world today. Do you know what I mean when I talk about a non-communicable disease?
No.
No? So it's a disease by which it's not through transmission. It's not like COVID. It's a disease that, we've actually normalized. So cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancer, all these kind of things, non-communicable diseases. Cancer's on there, and sometimes I feel a bit bad when you mention cancer, because probably you're all aware, back in 1995, a surgeon actually, do you know the story? The surgeon who actually contracted cancer by a tumor? So it's an interesting one. I've spent a lot of time in cancer. And cancer is an interesting non-communicable disease, because back in 95, 96, there was this German surgeon who was conducting abdominal surgery, removing a tumor from a patient. And as that process went on, he punctured his hand. And some of the blood, some of the tissue from that tumor infected the wound, and he actually grew a tumor. And not only did he grow a tumor of the same type, but it was genetically matched. So he'd been a host for the transfer of this tumor. And though they removed it, and he was actually the guy who was treated originally sadly passed away with complications in recovery, the surgeon himself, they removed the tumor and he was fine. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we classify this as non-transmissible, and yet that was one of, it's rare, but it's not unique. But those types of conditions, 99.999% of the time, are ones that actually you manage the risk of yourself. So it's literally down to what you do. So your choice of physical activity, your frequency of exercise, your food choices, your alcohol choices, your smoking choices, your vaping, all these things directly influence your risk of the development of these conditions. So cardiovascular disease alone reached what we thought was a high point, but it's been sustained, which is 19 million deaths in 2021, and it's not backed off. An interesting thing about cardiovascular disease is that if you were to go back in the medical history books about 100 years, and maybe some of you have, but if you were to do that, what you'd find is much of what we discuss today about type 2 diabetes and about certain types of cancers, they were discussing back then with regards to cardiovascular disease. And they were saying, what's going on? Why is suddenly everybody developing a cardiovascular disease? It's on the increase. It's becoming systemic. We've never seen these numbers before. And even back then, and there is a key journal from 1919 that stated clearly, this is due to the industrialization of food. We've messed too much with food, and this is the outcome. My concern has been for a long time is that we're having the same conversations about type 2 diabetes, and people go, no, it's not, because they dismiss it. But it is. Correlation is not always causality, but it is. We know for a fact it is. It's dietary choices. It's poor choices dietary that lead to these non-communicable diseases. So in 2021, again alone, at least 43 million people died from non-communicable diseases, which is 75% of all non-pandemic deaths globally. And you have to realize that 2021 was a pivotal year because that was the high point of mortalities around COVID. So that was like our plague year. And still 75% from NCDs. And then you've got to quantify all the other types of deaths that are outside of illness. Cancer, 10 million deaths. The four largest groups of non-communicable disease are cardiovascular disease, cancer, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes. Here's an interesting one for the people who listen to fitness influencers who say, pointless cardio, no point doing cardio. If you're a runner and you do this, you're going to look rubbish, you won't have a big arse, you won't look great, you won't have any muscle, you'll look withered, it doesn't help you to manage your weight. And they talk a lot about this. Have you heard all that kind of stuff being talked about? Yeah? You've actually invented a question. So you've created your own question. The question they create is can I look like this thing right now that is trendy with a huge bum, biceps and all the rest of it if I do lots of cardio? And the question is, well, arguably not. I don't know why you'd want to look like that, but if that's your question, you're not going to get that outcome. But have you ever noticed there's lots of things you can do occasionally. Lots of things you can have a, on-off affair with. You might do it for a while, but then not do it so well, and you feel like you're getting away with it. Some people will start to drink 8 glasses of water a day, and then they'll back off and they'll go back to drinking lots of teas and coffees and not so much water, and it comes and goes. Some people start exercise, and then they stop exercising for a while. Everyone familiar with this? Yeah. What's the longest you've ever tried not breathing for? Just curious. It's hard to have an on and off relationship with breathing because oxygen is the key to life. And this is going to astound you now. But do you realize that the higher your VO2 max, your oxygen potential, the better your respiratory system, your heart and lungs, the lowest your risk is of all non-communicable diseases. And the higher your quality of life. And then for the people in the room who, like myself, have passed the 50 threshold, when you get to 60 and 70, the 3 biggest indicators of your quality of life and your health status are your cardiorespiratory system, so your heart and lungs, and the strength in your legs. They're the 3 biggest indicators. One relates to your physical independence, and the other one relates to just how efficient you are and robust you are at doing the basics. Heart and lungs. And yet, fitness gurus around the world go, you don't want to do that. You want to follow my program of doing this nonsense instead. So it's interesting, isn't it? I think so. And then diabetes, including kidney disease, is over 2 million deaths. And we're talking about type 2 diabetes, which is the preventable one. And the reason why I've been obsessed with type 2 diabetes for so long is because it's been the pandemic before the pandemic, and I feel like I've kind of sat back and watched the society destroy itself in slow motion because it's got no sense of moderation and no restraint. Up until 2004, there wasn't a single case of a child being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in this country. Now they make up 15% of all new diagnoses. That's a crime. That's passive parenting. That's that parent who likes to do a selfie going, people think we're brother and sister. No, they don't. It's me best mate. It's not. You're a responsible adult. You're meant to bring that child up and make decisions in its best interest. So saying no to 2 litres of Coke a day is actually acceptable. And then regularly parents will say to me, this is all very good, Dr. Cole, but when my child wants a sweet, it won't stop asking for it. What do you do? Be a parent. Be a parent and say no. Just say no. What if your parent was stood at the edge of the pier saying, I'm going to jump in? Would you go, he really wants to do it? You'd obviously intervene. So to have a backbone, be a parent, don't be popular, be right, and actually intervene. But we haven't. As a society now, for well over 4 decades, we've just let that happen. And it's a crime. And I'll tell you why it's a crime, is because not only can we stop it, but it's fully reversible without medication. And that doesn't get talked about enough. So, according to the Wealth Organization, the main causes of all that mess is tobacco use, physical inactivity, poor dietary habits, alcohol consumption, and air pollution. And by the way, when we have tobacco use, that also includes any type of smoking. So we're talking about vaping. Anyone in the room who is still deluding themselves that vaping is a better option than smoking a cigarette or cigar, you're only lying to yourself and you're not kidding anybody. You've only got to look at all the health statistics and research around it. It's devastating. In fact, they've even created their own pathology that we call popcorn lungs. You can literally drown in your own fluids because of the damage created by those vapings. Shouldn't be tolerated. You shouldn't do it. Give it up. It's not big, clever, never was. Just don't do it. It's always interesting to me that people find it really easy to quit exercise, quit walking, quit drinking water, quit all this good stuff. But the minute you say to them, don't vape, don't drink Coca-Cola, stop having Happy Meals, they go, I really like it. I'm addicted. Just stop. Like, just have some and stop. If that was it, I could just have the talk now, couldn't I? Best of luck. Yeah. Just stop doing all that stuff. And these factors are closely linked to diet and lifestyle. And you literally make the biggest difference to your health status every single day with the choices you make the moment you wake up. It's literally, the power of it is all in your own hands. And it's all about whether or not, and I often say this when I'm going around the world, my job for the past 30 years, whether it's in the gym, whether it's in the laboratory, whether it's in the hospital, whether it's here and this, I just help people get out their own way. That's all I do. Just help people get out their own way and just make things simple. One of the best things you could do tomorrow when you wake up to start the brand new health regime is wake up, make your bed, it's always a good start, and then go to your kitchen or to your fridge or whatever it is and just drink a glass of water. It's like one of the single most profound differences you could make to your health status. Don't have a coffee or a tea for at least an hour after waking. Just let your body wake up, let those hormones of sleep turn into hormones of day, those stress hormones regulate and change so that the system is up and ready and primed before you start shutting down the receptors, trapping in dopamine in the brain and all this kind of stuff. Just give the system a chance to wake up and be alert. One of the single biggest differences you could make. I won't ask you how many of you will do it tomorrow because most people will say yes, but I've dealt with humans my whole life. Most humans lie. Even with the best of intentions, and I mean that respectfully. I've sat and done countless one-to-one nutrition consultations with athletes, football players, rugby players, hospital patients who need to have a life-saving operation. And 99 times out of 100, what they tell you is a work of fiction. They'll tell you, I eat all this, and they tell you all the good stuff. It's just a fact. There we go. So, we're going to go through dietary recommendations, because that's what I know about. When it comes to alcohol and smoking, my best advice is simple. Smoking, just don't do it. Just stop. Alcohol, every single study that's ever been done on alcohol shows that a reduction always leads to an improvement. There you go. Let's talk about food. Energy balance. Adjust energy intake to energy expenditure. What do you think we're going to discuss next? When we talk about energy, what do we normally lead on to? Calories. Sorry? Calories. Everyone understand calories? Yeah? Great. Anyone want to explain it to me?
Calories in, calories out.
Dead easy, isn't it? Dead easy. But it's not, is it? And why isn't it?
We all metabolize differently.
Not necessarily. That's one of those myths.
Yeah, empty calories as well as just normal calories, and calories that you're just putting in your body, with nutrition.
That's the problem. So we live in the era. By the way, we live in the third era of nutrition. The first one was biochemical. The second one is the one you think we live in, which is like hunter-gatherers and growing things on the land and all that kind of stuff, but that ended over 100 years ago. We live in the third era of nutrition, where actually the majority of what you eat isn't really definable as food. We call it a food-like substance. And that's where the term empty calories come in. And that's what leads to consecutive overconsumption of calories, because you're eating lots of food that taste a certain way, but there's very little nutrition in them, so they're empty calories. You get tons of calories, but you don't get tons of proteins or quality fats or carbohydrates or fibers or vitamins or minerals. You just get crap. And then your body says, well, actually, you wanted that, but what I wanted was B vitamins and vitamin C and vitamin D and protein. You didn't give me any of that. And so the drive to consume more remains, because your body knows what it needs. And then you end up in this trap where little by little, you start to eat progressively more until you've had too much. So let's have a look. Recommended physical activity per week is approximately 150 minutes of moderate intensity or 75 minutes of high intensity. But this now, what we're talking about is like getting active. Going to the gym, going for a run, going dancing, doing Pilates, yoga. We're talking about really focused, constructive time, regular participation in a type of activity that is going to put a stress and strain on the system. I won't do a show of hands. Statistically, we are really poor at it. 1.4 billion adults are insufficiently active. That doesn't mean they don't go to the gym. That means they are sedentary. They don't, the 1.4 billion is the estimated, just don't barely move at all. There's been no improvements in global physical activity levels since 2001. So we're getting bigger population and less active. And above 80% of adolescents are insufficiently active. So too much time indoors, too much screen time, and easy what we call transfer. Do you know what we mean by easy transfer? No, but that is a factor of it. But easy transfer, for me, like I had no option. You walked to school and you walked home. That was it. And if you wanted to go out and play out with your mates, you went out with your mates and you went wherever it was you're going. And now what we have is a culture of door to door. So the kids get in the Chelsea tractor, they get dropped off at the school, they get picked up from that, then they get dropped off at the mates, and they get dropped off at the shops, and they get dropped off everywhere. So they just don't move. And then much of their activity time is not very active. So we have this huge issue that people just don't move enough. And then we go back to that question, 10,000 steps. So why are we telling people to do 10,000 steps? Well, the fact is, not everyone, but the majority of people can walk to some means. It's an essential human component, and we're just encouraging people to be human and to walk. And often there's been lots of studies that have looked at, more like tribal primitive states, when we go back to hunter-gatherer times and what we did, and we quantify this calorific output, and people say, well, people were more active, so they burnt more calories. But I've got news for you. That's just not true. Because we have a factor that is a prevalent factor that is called metabolic compensation. Do you all hear that term before? Do you know what that is? No? So regardless of whether you go to the gym today or not, whether you do your physical activity today or not, whether you lie on the couch all day or not, your body will burn pretty much the same amount of calories net total, more or less. When you go for a run, or when you go to the gym, or whatever it is, two things demand less energy. Do you know what those two things are? Sorry? No, so if I literally go for a run, my endocrine system goes on slow mode, my immune system goes on slow mode, the energy that they would typically consume is directed to the muscles and the cardiorespiratory system, and then when I'm in recovery, what's one of the benefits of being fitter? You get better quicker, but what else? Just day to day. Breathing, heart rate.
Yeah, more energy.
Exactly. So you're more efficient at rest. So we say the average heart rate is 60 to 100 beats per minute. And if you go to see your doctor, your GP, and they put a cuff on you and they measure it, and you're 98, they'll go, yeah, that's within normal range. Everyone familiar with that? It's ludicrous. That's only normal because that's where the populations are. That is a high heart rate. But we've shifted normality to meet where the population is. Your heart rate, an efficient heart rate at rest, should be well less. Way less, probably sub 50. But we change the norms based on the population standards. And so if your heart rate is less because you're fitter, what do you think is also working in your favor? It costs less energy to keep you alive. So all the benefits of fitness are not actually experienced when you're out there doing it. It's how you adjust this calorie expenditure at rest and throughout the normal day. The problem with calories is addressed in the food you eat. It's by not eating too much. You will not out-train a bad diet. You won't run off that Mars bar, no matter how fast you did it. You've got to make better food choices. You've got to control that energy intake with your diet. You can't compensate it through movement. And that's another thing that you'll see regularly on Facebook. Someone will go, I've been brilliant this week, and I just did the park run, and my uber fantastic watch told me I burned 350 calories, so I can eat what I want now. You can't. You can't. Your body will accommodate that, metabolic compensation, it all comes good. Don't go and eat those 3 cakes. You haven't got a free pass. It doesn't work that way. We're not active enough. Most people don't do enough. And that's why if you do a little bit of fitness, and I live in this tiny little village now, and I love it. It's a lovely little place. But like I'm regarded as the fitness freak, just because like walk around and go for a run most days. People are like, oh, he's a fitness freak, him. He's obsessed. Really not. Genuinely not a fitness freak whatsoever. You're just doing a little bit. But the problem is, because most people do nothing, when you're doing something, you're the extreme. You're the outlier. You're the crazy one. But it's not true. It isn't true. It's because most people don't do enough. So we're not able to regulate our energy balance, and obesity rates are increasing year on year. Year on year, at a rate of about every decade, 10%. What we'd like for time, I've really got to get on and tell you more important stuff. I'm going to take you back in time, though, to this city when I was a child and going to watch Rocky IV. Have you all seen Rocky IV? Yeah. There's people who haven't answered that. Has not everyone seen Rocky IV? Yeah. My God. That's like Rocky IV should be on the curriculum. Genuinely now, Rocky IV is why I became a sports scientist. You know the bit where Rocky's training and he's out in the snow and Dolph Lundgren's in the lab? I was like, whatever that is, that's what I want to do. And I saw it in the city here. And we were in the queue and everyone was waiting to go and watch this boxing film. And walking up the road came this guy who was obese. And he came walking slowly up the road. And I kid you not, and this is the 80s, Liverpool, there wasn't a chorus of people giving him a hard time or taking the mick. It was so unfamiliar, and the guy looked like he was struggling so much, that this whole queue of reprobates, just like me, just went quiet. And me and my mates were going, like, I wonder what's happened to that guy. Like, how does that happen? And I always remember this because it was the day I thought, that's what I want to do. Promise you, that's true. But I always remember that day, and the reason being now is because on a daily basis now, I can walk around the city centre and see 200 people bigger, and it's not exceptional at all. Don't even bat an eyelid. And it certainly wouldn't turn a queue quiet. But back then, it was exceptional, and now it's not. It's been normalised. And so we're dealing with obesity. It is an epidemic, and then it's got this preserved status that you can't say too much because someone will say that you're fat-shaming them, and they're still beautiful no matter what I think, even if I don't care. So it's a hard area to work in. It really is. But it's a big issue because through obesity, we've got a whole catastrophe of health outcomes. So we want people to eat whole foods, and we want them to avoid or restrict their intake of processed foods. Best of luck with that in the modern world. How many people today can honestly say they've not eaten anything that was processed? 1, 2, 3, 4, and even some of those hands aren't that high. They're going, well, I think I did. Maybe. It's really hard. It's really hard. There's a good representation of the food pyramid. Have you all seen this before? Something like it? Yeah? Health industries around the world love a food pyramid. I love them too. I think they're remarkable. One of my favourite authors is actually Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings. And a lot of people love like Harry Potter and stuff, don't they? And this is very similar to Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter because it's a complete work of fiction. Barely anyone does this. So at the bottom there, the basis of your pyramid, given the fact that 66% of who and what you are is fluid, should be water. And you can have a bit of tea and coffee. You know, you can have 2 or 3 cups a day, depending on what type it is. But you should be drinking water. It's the substance of life. We live on a planet called Earth, but 2/3 of that is water as well. It literally is the superhighway of every single process in your body. 2% dehydration leads to 10% breakdown in function, cognitive and physical. You can go days and days without food. You won't go so far without drinking water. It's catastrophic. Everybody should drink water. Over the course of my career, I've had professional rugby players say to me it's boring, that they don't like it, that it's, it's not appealing. At the same time, they are literally drinking energy drinks like Monster and Red Bull and Coke and all this kind of crap down the system. And that's familiar for a lot of people. Then we've got the tea and coffee bit. That's a complex area to get into. If your coffee is coffee with a bit of milk, okay, we can go with that. If it's a black coffee, espresso, even better. But if your coffee is really a cake in a cup, because you go in there and use 20 syllables when you're asking for it, can I have a mocha waka, this with that and that syrup and all the rest of it, then don't kid yourself. You're not having a coffee. You're having cakes in cups. And you're probably best giving them up. They're not working for you. And there's tons of hidden calories in there. People say, I don't understand it because I don't eat so much, but I have 10 of these a day. So hydration should be our priority. Then we've got our vegetables, legumes, and fruits. And I know, and you probably know too, and you probably know who I'm talking about. There are people online who say, you shouldn't eat this. It's really bad for you. You know, it's catastrophic. It's not. It's really, really good for you. It's got tons of nutrients in it, tons of different types of vitamins, minerals, fibers that are in there. These are essential for gut health. They're remarkable. I even heard that lunatic recently say, if you look in the toilet after you've had some vegetables, sometimes you'll see a bit of vegetable in there. Never happened to me once. But if you eat meat, you never see that in there. I was like, really? Are people doing that? Are they like, are we back to Gillian McKeith days? Sifting through? I mean, you'll always find sweet corn, that's a given, but everything else breaks down pretty well. Vegetables, legumes, and fruits are so advantageous when it comes to your nutritional health. Whole grains. So there was the time when people said no carb and low carb. The problem with that is that people were having too many carbs, and they still are. So we live in a society that eats too many carbohydrates, and they eat too many refined, so white, simple carbohydrates, and they're not doing you any favors, and people eat too many of them. But complex, fibrous, whole grain carbohydrates are really good for you. They've got that fiber, and they've typically got other types of vitamins attached as well. We just want to eat them in the right amounts. Milk and dairy have their part in this with certain types of proteins, other types of enzymes. And yes, you're right, we are the only species on the earth that goes off and milks a cow or a goat and does that. That's a good argument. But we're also the only species on the earth that takes a whole field, makes sure that there's a sufficient amount of fertilizer in it, plants seeds, grows those seeds, nurtures those seeds, takes them off. We do all kinds of things that other animals don't do. So to me, that's a really lost argument when people get lost in that. And they go, well, you know, they don't do that. Also, we've been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So everything with regards to the evolution of your gut and its activity has actually been based on this. So it's a limited argument. Fish, egg, and meat. So then we're getting our sources of proteins in there. Fats and oils, we're talking about good stuff. So we're talking about things like butter, we're talking about olive oil, avocados, really good things. And then at the very top, that tiny bit, just because life is rare, as far as we know, it's a one-off. And, you know, some of these things do taste great. I admit this everywhere I go. Bloody love ice cream. Rum and raisin. Don't care what anyone says. It's the best tasting ice cream ever made. And once in a while, it's okay. Once in a while. Not every day. When I was a kid, growing up in this fine city, we didn't have a pudding or a dessert every single day. Not just because, we couldn't afford it, it just wasn't the way people ate. You had a pudding and a dessert after a fancy meal or a Sunday dinner, or, if it was someone's birthday or something. And now, it's become like the standard. And then people reward themselves with these things. So they go to work, which is a job they're paid to do, and they get to around about 10 o'clock and have a break and go, I've been really good today, so I'll have 2 chocolate biscuits and a cup of coffee. You go, wow, you're like the Dalai Lama. You mean you're just so good. You're out there doing so much good. And just like my dog, you reward yourself with food. And that's what you do, isn't it? I love dogs, but to train them, because they're simple, really. I know we talk about dogs being intelligent, but none of them came up with the theory of relativity or conducting brain surgery. You train them with food, don't you? So you go, there's a good boy or girl, pat it on the head, and if you do that enough times, it learns not to crap on the floor. It's great, isn't it? And then you reward yourself with the same mechanism. So you literally draw yourself level with that kind of species. It's interesting, but loads of people do it. And it should be the tiny bit at the top. Healthy and balanced, you only live once, have something you enjoy. The problem is, people have it all the time. Really, you should be looking at, especially if it's a proper dessert cake, less than once a week. But people don't. And what happens is that the world rarely eats like this. And that's the problem that we've got. It took a while. But you understand it now. We haven't even mentioned ultra-processed foods yet, UPF, but I'm going to now. This is how people eat. So 65 to 80% of the average diet is made up of ultra-processed foods. And they are, by definition, a food-like substance. So we don't even quantify them, classify them as food anymore. It's a food-like substance. So it's like food, but it's not food. And the reason being is some of it isn't even made with food ingredients. So that's how far removed from food UPF, ultra-processed foods, are. And yet it's 65 to 80% of the average diet. This is one area where the older populations are doing a bit better than the younger. So the older populations, they're the 65%ers. The younger populations are the 80%ers. Because they're coming through this whole industrialized food landscape. It's far more available, it's far more convenient, and it's far more normal. I actually remember, and I'm sure some of you do, back in the 80s when they opened the McDonald's in town, and it became like this place that people would go, and I remember once, the rich kid in our class, they went and had a birthday party there, and I didn't go for multiple reasons. And it was like this magical place that was in town, this American burger place, this McDonald's. And many years later, I kid you not, it was 1991, it finally was my turn to go and try McDonald's. So right up until then, I'd never tried it. And I went in town and ordered a Big Mac and fries. And honestly, I thought, this is such a disappointment. First of all, it looks nothing like what you see on the picture. And secondly, it was just awful. It was just mushy, soft. It just tasted awful. And the chips, we used to have at home chunky chips that were cut up from potatoes, and then, a chip was a chip. Then you got these things, these fries. I could do a whole talk on these fries. I know so much about them, russet Burbanks and what they do to them. Believe me, you don't need to criticize the burgers. If I told you what they did to the fries, you'd never go there again. But now, this is the normal way. When I was bringing my children up, I wouldn't allow them to go to McDonald's. And I used to tell a joke that if I was driving past McDonald's, I used to punch them, just to condition them to think it was a bad place. I never did that, and I stopped telling people that because people thinking I really did abuse the children. But I never ever took them to it. And parents, other people would say, oh, that's terrible. Your kids are going to get picked on in school if they'd never been to a McDonald's or a Kentucky Fried Mutant or whatever it is. And I was like, great, that's character development. If that's what is going to happen, if they're going to get picked on because they haven't eaten that rubbish, I'm all right with it, because it'll strengthen them and give them resilience. And so then you get to the point now where my eldest son is 19, my eldest daughter is 17, my youngest daughter is 11, And the oldest two, who've had free reign now, Seamus for 3.5 years, Autumn for nearly 2 years, no interest in going. No interest in going. And by the way, they were never bullied by anyone. No one cared. No one's interested. But they've never been. And now they're at a point where they understand things better for themselves, and they've got no appetite to go either. But in that meantime, you've taken them off to places where they can eat real stuff, where they can have a genuine, fresh-made steak burger. And when you look at what that is compared to the things that they sell. But there we are. Cornflakes, Ben & Jerry's. Do you know that? I don't know if you know this. I love this little fact. And you can go and Google this to find out it's true. But it was Lever Brothers, wasn't it, that bought Ben & Jerry's on the exact same day that they acquired Slimming World. Supply and demand. Genuinely, you can go and Google it, 100% fact. The same company acquired them both on the same day. It's great, isn't it? And you also probably know that some of the biggest, like the huge multinational food companies, largely own or are owned by huge, big pharmaceutical companies. I'm not saying that you should look into that and read into that anything you want. It's just a fact. And then you've got all different types of breakfast cereals that make all kinds of promises. So we did a study 20 years ago now for Kellogg's. And maybe you don't know this, but I'm going to tell you. Do you know where the lowest sale for Kellogg's are in the whole of the UK? Do you know which area of the UK buys the least amount of Kellogg's breakfast cereals? Liverpool. And they approached us at the university and said, we want to do a study. We want you to find out why people over here don't buy as much as other places. And I was in a meeting with them, and I said, I can tell you why, because Scousers like toast in the morning. That's largely it, to be honest with you. And they said, no, we've got a big chunk of money, we want to spend it. So we did a ton of research, and we went to schools, and we surveyed people, and we did all kinds of stuff. And guess what we found out? Most people ate toast. Yeah, it was quite nice when I had a whole presentation to talk them through. But we still buy it. We still buy it, we just don't buy it as much as other people. And have you ever stopped, because I think that the supermarket is a fascinating place, but the cereal aisle is the most fascinating. Because if you walk down, I want you to think of this wherever you go, but especially if you go to a Sainsbury's or a Tesco's or a Morrison's or an Asda, walk down the cereal aisle. And what you'll see is one side has 2 levels of shelves, and that's the side for all of you. That's the adult size. And the appeal on that aisle will be cost, and they'll also have things like they've got protein in, or it's like Special K, and it's about weight management, and it's about nutrients, and they'll have all these attractive offers. On the other side, they'll have at least 3 shelves, because obviously children are growing at different rates. And over here, your children are having conversations about food with monsters and monkeys and superheroes and all of these things, and they're getting offered toys, and they're getting offered all kinds of incentives to consume these products. To such an extent, and you know this is true, but a cheeky little monkey convinced you all that giving your children chocolate for breakfast was a healthy option. Yeah? You'd rather have a bowl of Cocoa Pops. And not only is it chocolatey, that's not enough. It's so chocolatey, it turns the milk brown. Because everyone likes brown milk, don't they? It's my preference. Love eating brown things. And through all of this mass marketing, advertisements, product placement, we come to the last part that I'll dwell on, the ultra-processed food problem that we have, is what we call a food swamp. Sometimes it's referred to food ghettos. And what that is, and I do this because I travel a lot, I will show up in any city or town, and I'll get myself to approximately where the center is, and I look around, and I say, who owns the conversation of food in this town? What can you see? And more often than not now, no matter where you go in Europe or the US and here in the UK, you see all the same people who own the conversation about food. It's Starbucks, and it's Costa, and it's Mackie D's, and it's Kentucky Fried this, and it's all the same people. And they are incentivizing you through your pocket, they're promising you things, they're doing all kinds of things to incentivize you to go in there and buy. They own the conversation around food. And they own it to such an extent that you know what the number one thing people say to me when I say you should eat fresh food, you should buy fruits, vegetables, better quality meat. What do you think is the number one thing that people say? Expensive. And it's not, but it is when compared to this cheap crap. This is really expensive. If you were to look at what it costs to make versus what they charge you for, the markup on it is ridiculous. They make billions. There's not so much a markup on fresh foods. We can come to the cost effectiveness of fresh foods versus this stuff later. But there you go, 65 to 80%. Processed foods are the next category, which you should have less of, but some of them are okay. A little bit of cheese, got its benefits to it. You know, we've been processing food for hundreds of years. So some, what we call typically processed foods, aren't necessarily that bad. Then we get into our culinary ingredients, and here, you know, we're talking again about things like butter rather than margarine. I don't know if you know this, but margarine was the original ultra-processed food. And it was part of a military campaign so that the people fighting in the fields in France could have something that was like butter. And they actually derived it through, it was a fascinating process, but it had more in kin with plasticine than it did butter. And it was a huge success. And then it only got worse there on in. And it multiplied, and then margarine became a thing. And then people realized margarine wasn't good, so they called it a spread. And so then people thought that was good. And then they started to say it had all kinds of stenols, and they started to promise all kinds of things that were in it. And then people started to do home experiments, which is to lead the live off and put it on the shelf and realize that insects won't even touch you. That's always a cautionary sign, by the way. When nature won't touch you, I'd read into that, I really would. On that note, I'm going to labor a second. Good friend of mine who's an incredible nutritionist, based in English Institute of Sport, had her office in Manchester. And she was the first person I know who did this. Other people have done it since. But this is a long, long time ago, probably like 18 years ago. And she went and she bought a McDonald's burger, and she bought some other bits and bobs from other places too, and she pinned them to a board, and she kept them in the office. So that when she was doing consultations with the athletes and they'd ask, well, what about this? Can I have it once in a while? And there was a date underneath it as to when it was put there. And as the months and the years went by, and there was no discoloration, and there was no smell, and there was no deterioration, and insects hadn't run in and eat it, or it hadn't attracted any rats or anything, and this burger still looked edible, to be honest with you, then people started to go, surely that's not normal. And it gained such a profile that they started to create fake science as to why this was the case. They started to market going, oh yeah, but that's normal. That will happen to a meat if you've cooked it this way. It's ludicrous. I promise you now, you can cook meat any way you want. If it's real meat and you leave it out, it will decay. It will break down. Other things will eat it. She kept those on her board, I kid you not, for 12 years. Yeah, 12 years. They were there, and the buns, everything was there. She kept them on the board. Culinary ingredients, so we're keeping them sparingly. And then at the top, we've got our minimally processed foods. And this is really how people eat. This is a true reflection of what people do in the modern world. And so when I have a conversation about food with the average person, knowing how the average person is and how the average person eats, it's an easy win. To go, I know I can help you to improve your diet. It's dead easy. You can just do this and just do that. It's really easy to improve someone's diet because most people's diets are occupied with things like this. It's attractive, it's convenient, and it's hugely profitable. So, if we look at this on the scale, this is the average diet in 2025. Unprocessed, minimally processed is down here. Culinary ingredients in the second part. Processed foods just here. And an ever-increasing amount of ultra-processed foods, which goes back to a comment made earlier on by that lady, which is that they are empty calories. Tons of calories in them, but no nutrition. And that's Siri. Never let it be said that your phones are listening to you the whole time. So there we are. There's the reality of it. And only you know, I'm not going to ask you. This isn't Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want people to get up and go, yes, I had a happy meal yesterday and I repent. But this is the reality, and only you know where you're at on it. But what I will say is that humans are equipped, and it's admirable, with a positive bias. And I've had people who've come in and they are so obese that we've got to dramatically monitor them on a ward, get their weight down to have a life-saving operation. And I'll talk about their diet, and then they'll talk me through, and then they go, oh, but I had an apple 2 days ago, so, some good stuff. Like, genuinely, the state that your digestive system is in, that you might as well have not bothered. Like, what a waste of time that was. Your body can't even break it down. But we do. We focus on the positives. People are phenomenal at it. They really are. I've got loads of my mates played rugby, and you say to them, oh, so you went out with the lads, yeah? How many did you have? They go, well, I only had 9. Could have been 10. It's like positively placed. You know what I mean? That's what humans do. So let's have a look at our 5 portions of fruit and veggies every day. I was actually a part of the Westminster Forum for a long time. I was a part of this debate. We looked at all the research and we said we should be telling people to have 9. And then a health minister, we've got a story about a health minister for you in a minute. He said, nah, people won't go for that. So we said, all right then, so what are we thinking, 7? We went, nah, let's say 5. So it was arbitrary anyway. And then, so we say to people, have minimum. So we won a tiny battle. We said, okay, if we're going to say 5, we want to say minimum 5 a day. And they went, okay, minimum 5 a day, because it's got packed with vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. It doesn't matter about ex-drug using bodybuilders standing in Tesco saying they're awful. That stuff's all true. The average person who's good, this 1 in 10, these are the good ones, they have 3. So the best score, the average 1 in 10 in the UK, has 3, because we set the goal of 5. So if we'd set it at 9, maybe they would have got 5, and maybe they'd hit the minimum, but they don't. We eat far too little of these things. 1 in 10 people get 3. Now, do I say the next story?
Yes.
I don't think I can, because there's too many people recording this. It doesn't though. It doesn't though. You can't be trusted, any of you. This is a true story. And it was last Friday. So I'm going to really tame this story down, okay? So last Friday, my nephew, love him to bits, he lives in China, and he came over to see the family for Christmas, and he came up to see me, and he came to stay where I am. And I live in a little village that's the other side of Chester, and him, my nephew, my son, we went for a meal in the village pub, and we sat there, and there's a table next to us, and you keep going, I recognise that person. Where do I know that person from? And my son sat next to me, and he's going, we know him. Who is that guy? And I'm looking at him, and this is going to sound awful and judgmental now, but I was thinking, well, he's not like one of the lads, because he clearly doesn't do any exercise. So he's not in that group. And time was going on, and we were sat there, and he was there with 2 children and his parents. And then, just as we were finishing up, the penny dropped. And it was Matt Hancock. And I would never dream of saying anything to disrespect a person in front of their children. It's not the right thing to do. But I'm not in his fan club. So I didn't. But then, as luck would have it, do I tell this part of the story? I'm not proud of this, by the way. Well, I am, because I really want to tell you. The thing I could, like, women in the room, I'm interested in your response to this. No. The thing I could never, when the scandal with Matt Hancock having an affair, right, the thing for me, I couldn't believe that, one, he had a wife, and then was able to have someone on the side. I was like, wow, there's 2 people in the world prepared to sleep with you, and you found them both. So, it was always quite impressive, if I'm honest with you. Do I tell this last part? So, all right then. So, I'm not going to say anything in front of his children or his parents. That'd be awful. Doesn't matter. It's not the right thing to do. But anyway, we're paying up and all the rest of it. And I thought I just need to nip to the loo. So I go up to the loo, and as fortune would have it, he's at the urinal. So I stepped up, and I looked over, and I said, now I find it even harder to believe. How on earth did you have an affair? That's all I'm saying. That's as far as the story went. But there was nothing that explained it there to me either, just in case anyone was ever wondering. Anyway, so health ministers and their advice, they told us to go with 5. The best people get 1 in 10 get 3. So that doesn't work. Eating fibre, you know what, there's so much for me to get through. You'd think I had all the time in the world. Let's get into fibre. Why is fibre important? Why don't we talk about it enough? Well, in this space here, does this work? Yes. This is the space I'm most fascinated with in the past 5 or 6 years, which is the gut microbiota. We've learned more about it in the past 10 years than we've known for the previous 100. It is the center of the human universe. It's got its whole ecology. You are a collection of 37 trillion cells. Within that space there's over 100 trillion cells that function on your behalf. 70% of your immune system comes from the gut. And really, all you need to remember is that those good gut bacteria, those probiotics, they rely on fiber. You feed those with fiber. Okay, so fiber is a bulking agent. It helps with regards to all kinds of digestive processes. But the first thing you do is you pay these microbes, these gut bacteria in your gut. And it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Even the byproducts, the outcomes of these things when fed well, what we call postbiotics, they have a human function with regards to human health. And so when there is a lack of fiber in the diet, we have an increased risk of disease, we have increased inflammation, we have a decreased production of short-chain fatty acids, and we have an increased production of LPS. So what we have is a decrease of all the things we need and an increase of all the things that we don't want, simply because there is an insufficient amount of fiber. And so when we have a look at actual fiber intake by country, this is one of those races that we don't want to win, but there we are. We're even making the Yanks look good. There we are. So you can see the average across here. Countries like Norway, Poland, Hungary, Germany, Finland, Denmark, Austria, all either above this average mark here. And there's us. I mean, I don't know if there's any Americans in the room. I love America, despite the lunacy. But it's a sad state of affairs when it comes to a nutritional thing and we're making them look good.
I'm surprised Spain.
Yeah. I mean, people, I kind of get, I know what you mean, but I don't really. I used to think like that, but actually, you know, it's this old idea of the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is a way that we describe a way in which people should eat. And it originates from the Mediterranean, but even in the Mediterranean, they barely eat like that anymore. Sorry? How do they get the figure on intake? So this is all information that we derive again through the World Health Organization and the Office of Global Burden. So this is all done through dietary analysis and survey, population sample surveys. In the past, when I was working with GM Innovations, some of the research we do feeds into these kind of polls. So you collect this data, this epidemiological data from certain research houses around the world. So yeah, it's pretty robust and reliable data, quantified through, you know, absolute measures. But there we go. So there's our actual fiber intake. But there's our recommended intake. So even the countries that are doing well aren't actually hitting the line that they need to be reaching. So what we say typically is that on average, people consume around about 50% of the recommended daily intake. And this is catastrophic for your gut health, because the gut is how you absorb nutrients. It's 70 to 80% of your immune function. You know, you are what you eat. And the gut, which we often refer to as the second brain, which always fascinates me because it's the one that develops first. It's directly hardwired to the brain via the vagus nerve. 90% of the communication goes from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. It's the center of control with our somatic self, our sense, emotion. You all know what we call comfort foods. Yeah? Hands up in the room whose favorite comfort food is spinach. No? Surprised? Okay, I'll go for the obvious one. Carrots? No. Chocolate? Ice cream? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. And why? Very predictable. Because when you consume those types of products, you get a huge release of oxytocin and dopamine in the brain, so you feel rewarded and loved. So when someone in the world has broken your heart, Ben and Jerry's will make you feel better. And when you've consumed enough, you can go to Slimming World, and they're happy either way. So all of these types of foods have a huge control on what we eat and how we feel about what we eat and how we feel about ourselves, but at the same time leads to the deterioration of the gut itself. So it's dramatic.
Sorry, is there a difference between, like, you know, when a food contains like soluble fibre and insoluble fibre?
Yeah.
Any difference for the gut, or is it like, is one bad? Or?
It is. It's not so much that one is bad, but there is a difference between soluble and in. I mean, really, the preference is to go for soluble fibres because they're the ones the body can most readily uptake. Insoluble fibres are more difficult to break down, and when you measure through blood, you can get a higher circulating amount, but they're less active within the cell. So they still have a functional benefit, but they're less effective. Is the reality of it. And really, when you're looking at fibre, it's a bit like when you're looking at any kind of whole food. Variety is key. And the more complex, the better. So the more different types you have, the better. But the reality is that when we look at dietary fibres, so the things that you would typically consume by having fruits and vegetables and potatoes and all that good stuff, is the average person has less than 50%. And it's a compromise to the gut, and it leads to dysbiosis, it leads to poor functionality, dysregulation of the gut, and has its part in other types of negative outcomes. So, now we're going to get on to fish. Looked at my clock, know how much I've got to talk about. I'd suggest Jay sits down for a little bit, because it might take more than 15 minutes. And then eat fish for dinner at least 2 to 3 times per week. What is our nation's most famous dish? Everywhere I go in the world, fish and chips. And that's not the kind of fish, and that's not what you should do to it. And everywhere I go in the world, and the minute they know you're from the UK, they think, fish and chips. Yeah. And by the way, in most places of the world, their fish and chips is awful. They try to recreate something that's bad, and they make it even worse. Over here, you can get one that at least tastes nice if you go to the right place. But it's not the kind of fish we're talking about. Norwegians have a reputation for being great fish consumers, and compared to us, they are. And so when we have a look at this now, recommendations, 300 to 450 grams of fresh, wild, line-caught, fatty fish. So we're talking about salmon, mackerel, bluefin tuna, anchovies, all those fish that no one likes, eating that 2 to 3 times a week to meet the minimum. In reality, that's naive. Even the Norwegians, who've got huge amount of potential and access to it, eat less than half. And therefore, we have a whole world in which the majority of people are unbalanced at a cellular level when it comes to omega-3 and omega-6. You can get the marine-based DHA, EPA, omega-3 from sea algae. The problem is none of our stomachs can actually digest it unless we turn it into a supplement and we can process it. We do that. We have a vegan version. But you can't eat it. You can't go and eat sea algae. So for the rest of us through the diet, it's consuming these fish. Most people don't eat it. Taste preferences have led people away from it. When they eat fish, they like the white stuff, drenched in batter, smashed to death in a deep fat fryer, served up with half a field worth of potatoes that have been treated the same way, if you're posh with mushy peas, and covered in salt and vinegar. That's how people take it. It's not addressing any of that. So malnutrition, currently a third of the world is dealing with malnutrition, and by 2026, it's expected to be half. Last year, January, we reached a landmark published in The Lancet, one of the highest impact medical papers in the world, because we crossed a threshold. There are now over 1 billion people living with obesity and less than 1 billion dealing with starvation. So now malnutrition in the 21st century is in a new era. We've got a bigger problem with people eating too much of the wrong thing than we have with people not being able to eat enough. And that is the direct outcome of the industrialization of food, and it's having a huge impact on our health, it's having a huge impact on our children. And so it's taking its toll on our bodies. So we are completely out of balance. When you look across our entire nutrition spectrum, it's very little that we get right. insufficient amounts of omega-3, which is an essential nutrient that manages inflammation, helps to regulate the cell, and actually has a direct link to your risk of the development of certain types of non-communicable disease. We don't get sufficient amounts of fiber, so we're not nurturing the gut, which is the center of all human health. And we get nowhere near enough vitamins and minerals, which is why so many people are dealing with vitamin deficiencies, the common one, or one of the most common ones, being vitamin D. And so that's the status. Unbalanced omega-3, unbalanced gut, unbalanced intake of essential nutrients. And from this point forward, and I'm happy to debate this with anyone in the world, whether they're an Instagrammer or an academic, and I go on podcasts and I do all that kind of stuff. I'm happy to talk to anyone. Your body needs nutrients. That's what it needs. That's why we typically ate food, was to derive those nutrients. If you're going to look at the biochemistry of what it is to be alive, every single sequence of the body needs nutrients like vitamin A, the B vitamins, C, D, K, omegas in place so the body can communicate and regulate normal functionality. When they're not there, there is either a breakdown or a complete stop in communication. And that never works in your favor, ever. So, why do we have a health protocol? Why not just go around telling everyone, so go and eat all this stuff? I did that for years and years. I stood on my soapbox and said to people, you need to eat more whole food, and you need to eat more fish, and you've got to stop eating this, and you've got to stop doing that. And lots of nutritionists do that. And we do that because it's the right thing to say. And you should. And I would hope that after tonight, if not before now, everybody here starts to think a little bit differently about food and start to prioritize those whole foods. Start to change your diet little by little. But the reason why it's had no success, even though we've been giving people this message, certainly my entire professional career and before me, is because humans like convenience. And the battle we're engaged in is one against convenience. It's so easy and cheap to access all of those things, and they're so common, people think it's normal. And what people need is a solution that works. We also have huge challenges and barriers around how food is done. We've got a huge issue with regards to agriculture and aquaculture that actually we need political governmental legislation to change the terms on which it's done. From an ecological point of view, from a sustainable point of view, and from an economical point of view. Imagine this. 100 years ago, there were 2 billion people on this planet. Now there are 8 billion and counting. The same amount of limited resources and 4 times the amount of people. And we know what we've got wrong. So we're not going to fix it with the same thinking that created the problem. And also, it is romantic and idealistic to go, well, let's just go back to the old days when you'd shop at your local farm and you'd fetch, you'd pretty much milk the cow yourself and carry it home. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And that's where I actually always describe this as the antidote to the modern diet. Because as a nutritionist, before I'd heard the Zinzino, I adopted a add before you subtract approach. What I would do, instead of telling you to quit everything, because I knew that just didn't work, people go, yeah, I'm going to do that, and they leave your office, and they go, I'll do that tomorrow. Oh, I'll do it on Monday. Actually, I'll do it 2 weeks Monday, because I've got my Auntie Bertie's party, and then there's this, then there's that, and it never happens. Whereas when you say to someone, take this today, but back then I'd say, just add blueberries to your breakfast. Add some raspberries, easy win, they taste sweet and it's not a problem. And I would just start to encourage them to add the things that were missing. And I had huge success. But I've had nothing but profound global success with these 3 steps. Address the cell, address the gut, and give the body a sufficient amount of nutrients. And that's what the health protocol is. And so, literally what we do is we put back in what people are missing from a standard diet. The standard diet, all this stuff on the right, gives you huge amounts of omega-6. Omega-6 is another essential fat. It's an integral part of your immune function. If there's a problem, if there's a pathogen, if there's an illness, omega-6 sends the alarm bell and you get an inflammatory response and the body does something about it. But when there is an insufficient amount of omega-3, there is nothing to calm that back down. And so a lot of people live in what we call a pro-inflamed state, chronic inflammation. Omega-3 brings the resolution. the DHA and the EPA. EPA is the anti-inflammatory. 60% of your brain is fat, 25% of that fat should be DHA. So when you have a deficiency of DHA, imagine what compromise there is around your decision making, your cognitive function. It's profound. And that's why now health authorities all over the world are saying to pregnant women, when you're pregnant, supplement with omega-3, and the first 4 years of life for your child, supplement with omega-3. It's so integral towards their development of the brain, cognitive function. And you've only got to look around the world. Look at some of the decisions that have been made in the last 10 years, and you don't need me to prove to you that people are struggling cognitively to make sensible decisions. Oh, my Lord. Remember, democracy is a system where any two idiots can outvote a genius. Look at where we're at. Oh, my God. But I'm not going to get political. Ask Mark Hancock. I just commented on his willy. Didn't say anything about his politics. And so this is the problem we have. And getting people to, well, if I was to say to you now, the reality is 3 a week is modest. You need to eat 4 or 5 times a week. You've got to have fresh, wild-caught salmon, mackerel, bluefin tuna, anchovies. What's the first thing you're going to say to me? It's too expensive. And the numbers don't add up. 6.3 billion people with a deficiency. How do we give 6.3 billion people a fish every day? I know I've got a beard and stuff, but don't confuse me for that guy. No, I don't have the same powers. Really don't. So we've got to look smartly. And that's where Balanced Soil comes into its own. Because when we measure this, and our first paper will be out imminently, when we measure this, the optimal ratio is less than 3 to 1. Less than 3 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. The average typical values all across Europe are 15 to 25 to 1. So people way out of balance. And this scale that you see here, back in 2004, Harrison von Schacke published the Omega Index, and it estimates your risk of cardiovascular disease. If you're up at this end, you're in the highest risk category. If you're in the middle, you're in the moderate risk category. And if you're over here, you're in the lowest risk category. And we also now know through further research of 21 years that this model holds up in certain types of cancers, metabolic disorders, diabetes. When you're down here, you're at the lowest risk of the development of those non-communicable diseases. And all it takes, we haven't got one here, but all it takes is like consuming this much of a product once a day. Transformation in 120 days, because that's the lifespan of a red blood cell. And there you go. That was more the cup. That's a nice little bottle, though. But it's a tiny amount. And it's way more cost effective. And it's an easy habit to adopt. Because I promise you now, the easier you make something, the more likely a person is to do it. That's just a fact. That's how humans are, the majority of them. I do a lot, even the book I wrote was the Stoic Guide, about mindset, about doing the tough stuff. And God forbid, if you ever follow me on social media, that's all I harp on about. I bore myself. But the reality is, you're speaking to the minority. The minority. Most people want it to be easy, convenient, and be effective. And that's fair enough. And so, these people here entertain me a lot because they'll take a standard off-the-shelf supplement and they go, yeah, mine's cheaper and I've been taking this for years. And you go, right then, we have a test. I think on the advert for this talk tonight it said, Dr. Cole's going to tell you what a test can tell you about you. It's going to tell you about how you've been, not what's likely to happen. And that test is a verified, independent, lab-based analysis of your fatty acid profile. You can measure this and quantify it. And when we measure all those people who take a standard product that we know doesn't work, they come out here. And that goes back to the Cochrane paper I told you about 2018. You see a difference, but it's not meaningful. It doesn't change the health status. And just short of 98% of the people who take our product in 120 days get down here. Remarkable.
I've measured 2 people who've been taking omega-3 and not cheap ones either. One was doTERRA.
Yeah.
Expensive supplements, and one was from another store. But they both came out. One came out at 15 to 1. One came out at 13.
Yeah.
And they've been taking omega-3.
See it all the time. See it all the time.
So 7 is actually quite good.
Yeah. It is, yeah. And that's an average, remember. So, yeah. And I see that all the time. And it's an expensive hobby, isn't it? It's to spend money on something that doesn't work. It really, even if it's only a tenner, it's a tenner you're just throwing away. And some people spend a lot of money on supplements that don't work. And I do see it all the time. And the one thing that we've got, and actually now, I think when you started us off, Jay, you said that we had like 300. When I joined Zinzino, and I'm a researcher, and they said to me about Vitas Laboratories, who do all the tests, and I knew who they were. Because at the time, by the way, I was actually the lab director for the Queen's Laboratories in Greater Manchester. I knew who Vitas were. And they said their database at the minute's got 500,000 samples in it. My mind was blown. That's a huge database. As I speak before you today, it's just short of 1.3 million. And we'll be way past like 1.5 million within the next few months. So that database is growing. It's the single biggest database of its type in the world. Next week, I'm flying in 2 of our researchers from head office, Doctors Emily Gislovic and Martina Torreson. We've got a meeting down at the University of Bath with Professor Dylan Thompson down there, because we're analysing all that data for peer review in the scientific base. And we're going to probably produce research off the back of that for the next 10 years. It's enormous. We literally are telling the people how the world looks.
Yeah, just from my own research, I've been on a bit of a cancer recovery journey for 10 years. It was considered terminal. But what I noticed, just only being introduced to Zinzino in the last 3 months, is, omega-3 is a big supplement that's even recommended by a lot of nutritional experts, for myself and for my wife. But it's not in the right quantity.
Mm-hmm.
That was the big shift in that most supplements with the recommended dosages is nowhere near what we need to take in terms of the amount.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you need you need 2 boxes from a standard supplement in order to get what you're getting from the balance well.
And even then, it doesn't work. Because we tried all that. Yeah, we tried all high dose and standard supplementation. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. So with this, it's based on a ratio of how much per kilogram of your own body mass. Because obviously people are really different. And if you're more active, you take a little bit more. If you're dealing with pathology, we encourage people to take a little bit more as well. So yeah, it's body weight dependent. There's all these kind of factors that go for it, set it apart. I mean, really, I could do a whole talk that's just about balance oil. It is remarkable. But the fact is that if you want to measure it objectively, empirically, as to how you can reclassify your health status, simply just the consumption of that consistently is going to dramatically change who and how you are.
Colin, you just said then, if you're more active, you need a bit more. So we know that it's 0.15 times by the kilo body weight. Is there a number that you recommend if you're like pretty active?
Yeah, I encourage people, depending on how active you are, and again, most people overestimate, so go easy. But if you really are exercising and giving it some most days of the week, then I would encourage you to take 0.2. Yeah, that's how much you take per kilogram. Okay, and that's what we do with a lot of the sports clubs as well. So you take a bit more. Kids can. We've got specific. You go on the website. We've got specific dosage guidelines for kids because it's different because they're developmental needs. So just check that out online. It's really easy accessible. So we've done over 1.3 million tests. It's housed by Vitas. It's all objective, independent. They're world leaders in dry blood spot sampling. And we shift people dramatically. The average, and we see people much higher, is from around about 14 to 2.8 for the vast majority of people, just short of 98% of people in 120 days. And then you might say, well, what about those other 2%? Some people take a little bit longer. Athletes actually take a bit longer than general public because they're training every day, they're breaking down muscle tissue, there's more pro-inflammatory markers circulating more often. It takes a little longer of an adjustment time. But it is. I mean, this in itself is the flagship product. It's the key thing that Zinzino is known for all over the world. And the attention just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. This is what is bringing people to the table. We get approached now, I was just chatting to Steve before we came in tonight. We get so many approaches now from sports clubs and institutions. We've only been back a few days and Steve's had 17 calls with everything from Real Madrid to some of the other biggest clubs in the world who are saying, how do we get our hands on it? We need an omega-3 that works. That's it. You can only keep something quiet for so long. So I actually originally said that I'd go on till 9 o'clock, so let's see if I can do it before that. This is a complex one. I'll try and do it really quick. So despite what that lunatic keeps saying to people, plant-based foods are phenomenal, particularly when it comes to dietary fibers, but people don't consume enough. And I've been telling everyone for years to consume more, is to have them and have a preference around berries and dark leafy greens, and, organize your meals around this, start with these things: nuts, legumes, beans, dark leafy greens, have some berries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, and then have the odd bit of citrus fruit in there across the week, have the odd pear, the odd apple. And people go, yeah, and they just don't do it. They just don't do it. It's just a fact. It's just the reality of it, okay? For most people, that section of the supermarket as you walk in is the bit they're just getting through, so they can get to the fridges at the back and look at packaging with pictures of cows on and stuff. And so there's a distinct lack of this. And this is why we see gut-related issues are increasing year on year. And Xenobiotic is a dietary fiber blend that is targeted towards addressing the gut microbiota. Your microbiota, your gut is unique. It's like your thumbprint. You have your own biota, and it's formed by about the age of 4. After that, that's your culture. You have to manage it. It's all based on what you put in and what you don't put in. And so even how you're born, if you're a cesarean birth, it affects your gut microbiota. Your diet in your early life. This is why you've got to be really selective. These choices you make for your children, you're setting them up for the humans they're about to become. And then we have things like antibiotic use, which we've taken to such an extreme in the West that we now have people who are born antibiotic resistant. So they've never even took it. But their parents took so much of it that they're resistant. It's an incredible state of affairs. Processed foods, done that, too much of it. Stress. If you're not stressed, you haven't been paying attention. Just in case anyone hasn't paid attention for a while, the world's gone nuts. And then you've got everything from all those lunatics all the way through to fuel bills and all the stuff that affects us. Life is stressful. That's life. Medicines, we prescribe them too quickly and easily. Too many people take them. We genuinely live in a society where at your garage, at your local shop, it's really normal to walk in and see Pringles, Diet Coke, and go to the corner and say, right, can I have some paracetamol or some anti-inflammatories and cough syrup, please? Yeah, there you go, bang. We've normalized that. If you're in work and you've got a headache, you're probably really comfortable saying to someone, have you brought any paracetamol with you? And they go, yeah, have some of my drugs. We're really happy passing drugs around. People leave their homes to go to work with their own stash of drugs just in case they get pain that day. What a world we live in. So people medicate, self-medicate, and the minute you go to see your doctor, bless them all, I have a huge respect for medicine. It's great at saving lives and acute stuff. For lifestyle stuff, it's terrible, and you have to admit it. That's just the way it is. And it's like a triage system. Okay, I've got this, brilliant, take that, I'll suppress it. Wow, have you ever thought about getting to the cause? Maybe what if we fixed it? And I saw an advert recently, honestly, genuine, where there was this doctor, and you're not allowed to do this, by the way, it breaks the rules, so he's got his scrubs on, for some reason, with a stethoscope around his neck, would never happen, and he's dancing away, and he's going, people keep talking about lifestyle changes to lose weight. Don't you realise we've got drugs that do that? And starts doing this on the screen and popping up the name of drugs. It's like, wow, that's where we're at. You're literally saying to people, don't you dare change your lifestyle and improve things. Just take our drugs. Why wouldn't you do that? It's crazy. So we love drugs. You don't even have to be Jimi Hendrix. We just love them. We take them for everything. It always amazes me now when people have got a cold and they start taking lockets. It's like, just a cold, drink some water. You know what I mean? Just like everything is medicated. Your age works against you. What a shame, because we're all getting older. Infections, and your risk of them. And then diseases. All these things are taking the toll on your gut. The gutter is the centre of the human universe. And then gut health, what we're looking at is diversity. We want plenty in there. So the amount of fibre intake, the type of fibre, plant foods, fermented foods, increase diversity. But these are all the things that we're having less of. So the outcome of gut health is the thing that year on year we consume less of. And so what we want are dietary fibers, resistant starch, inulin, oat bran, wheat bran, cellulose, guar gum, pectin. We get bacterial fermentation. We get those bacteroides, the firmicutes. We get a production of acetate, propionate, bitrinate, and we start to reorganize that. Think of it as a tropical rainforest, and now what you've started to do is repopulate it with all the parrots and birds and animals and trees that should be there. You start to feed everything and encourage it to bloom. And it's all associated with improved gut barrier function, so less likely to have things like IBS. So all of this cultivates an environment that will bolster your health. And we have what's called the gut-brain axis. I've already mentioned it, the vagus nerve. What happens here, directly hardwired to the brain. It's a way to control emotion. So rather than, when you get that email that's devastating or someone breaks your heart, rather than going home and reaching into the fridge and pulling out your favorite tub of ice cream, go for a run, go for a walk, drink some water. Start to have less reliance on these symptomatic crutches. Because that's all they do. They make a bad situation worse. Fiber also regulates blood sugar, and blood sugar is the superhighway to type 2 diabetes. So what we see here is the spike that we talk about, and that's where you get an amplified elevation when you eat something. So when you eat a chocolate bar, you get this big spike. The problem isn't just the spike, it's the fall. So it's the difference between this point and this point leads to you having increased appetite. Hunger pangs, you're more likely to go and consume some more. You get a dysregulation of this insulin cycle. This is a more normalized curve and less pronounced because you'll always get a rise in insulin when you eat. It's part of the way the body adapts to break down those foods. But it's these spikes that cause the problems, and there's no getting around it. It doesn't matter whether you've done a marathon. It doesn't matter whether you gave money to charity. It doesn't matter whether you phoned up and voted for your favorite person on Britain's Got Talent. If you eat refined sugars, processed and ultra-processed foods, you'll get a spike and the body has to adjust. Do this enough and you exhaust it, you get a loss of glycemic control. That's the fast track to metabolic condition, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes. That's the way it goes. And if you are increasing your body mass, your weight, overweight, obese, then all these mechanisms are a part of that pathology. And so we want to manage that. It influences your appetite, your insulin production, and therefore your weight management. We also got this notion of cholesterol. Now I'm desperately looking at the clock. So tell me, folks, if you eat high cholesterol foods, is that good or bad for you? I didn't ask, does your body need it? I said, if you eat high cholesterol foods, is that good or bad? Your body's brilliant with cholesterol. Your body produces cholesterol. It's functional within the cell. But you have this system of regulation. And if you eat food that's high in cholesterol, like eggs, the body produces less. So it balances it off. So what is it, do you think, that increases circulating cholesterol in the blood? It's not cholesterol. It's not eggs. Saturated fats. That's the problem. And even then, you just want to keep them down to a minimum. And what we want is we want to reduce the LDL, the bad cholesterol, increase the HDL, and have a better ratio of the two. And you know what's really good at managing that process? Fiber. So it really helps the body to manage and send less cholesterol back into the circulation. Because cholesterol in the blood isn't where it should be. It should be functional within the cell. So when we can measure it in the blood, that's where we know there's a problem. So we want cholesterol to be in the cell. And fiber is one of the mechanisms which manages this. It's those soluble fibers. And so that's everything that's in this simple little product. It's a really elegant product, xenobiotic. And to me, people say, well, what are the non-negotiables? What should you take every single day? And to me, it's balanced oil and xenobiotic. Non-negotiable. And they are transformative for your health.
I'm new to it, but I've seen a lot of confusion about dosage. I've seen people saying 1, 2, where do you stand on it as much as possible? Or?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. This is a product you'll experience. And introduce it carefully. Yeah, yeah. I actually, to that point, I say to people, just start with half a scoop and do that for 10 days. And if everything's okay, then go to a full scoop, another 10 days, scoop and a half, and you're just going along. The target is to get to 2 scoops per day and then maintain it. But you might have to do a little bit of patience, because if you're 10 days in half a scoop and things aren't quite settled and you're good friends with the toilet, extend that period of time. Or if you're having a bit of a trouble when you go to the toilet, you really are on Facebook liking lots of things because it's taking time. Extend the period, let your body adjust. It takes time to adjust, and not more than 2. Not more than 2 scoops per day. That's the golden land we want you to get to.
Some people don't get to 2.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's like everything else. The route is towards improvement, not perfection. And just introducing those fibers and making sure we're starting to readjust the gut. It can take time. People are really funny, and Jay's not going to think I'm funny because I'm well over time, but people are really funny. So they'll get unhealthy over decades, and they want to get healthy really quick. You know what I mean? It's the same. I promise you now, my inbox is just stable at the moment, usual things that I deal with. We'll get to around about May, and people go, oh, wow, that holiday I booked is in June, and now I need me beach body. Dr. Cole, how'd you lose 10 stone in 4 weeks? Because I've got to look good in my bikini when I'm in Magaluf. It's like, just starve yourself. Obviously, I don't say that. I just say I can't help you. But people really want results quick, even though it took a lifetime to create the problem. But when it comes to fiber, the minute you start to introduce it, you're improving the situation. Just be patient. It'll take time. Back to this. Inadequate is where this line is, the average. Here's optimal. And so given that this has 12 grams, if you look at these values, for most of these, a daily consumption of this will get them up to the line that they want to be. So given the fact that most people are having just less than half, if they are taking a scoop, 2 scoops across the board, you're going to hit that. And consistency is key. I promise you now, I say this all the time and I'll keep saying it, you are the outcome of the things you do most often. So over time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, if you've been consistent here, your body and your health will reflect that. That's just a fact. It's consistency. It really is. Just put the effort in. Have good habits. It's one of the phrases we use a lot in professional sport. Good habits. Just have really good habits. Do the things consistently well. Every day. Just go through it. I saw somebody on Facebook have a rant. They said they drove somewhere Christmas Day and they saw someone running. They're like, for God's sake, it's Christmas Day. Have a break. I was one of those people. I love my Christmas Day run. One of the reasons I like it is there's less traffic and less people. It's fantastic. You go out for a Christmas run, it's brilliant. And also, the day when Christmas is arbitrary. It might be a Sunday, a Monday, a Friday, but my training is consistent, so it fits on top of it. So to me, just because it's Christmas Day isn't like, well, you're meant to do that 10K, but it's Christmas Day. That's not an excuse I'm looking for. If that's the day you do a 10K, then go off and do your 10K. That's just the way it works out. I'm not trying to prove anything to the world. That's just the day it works out. Just good habits. Stick to good habits. Take 2 scoops of that every day. Stick to good habits. Transformative for your gut. And then we're looking at balancing our micronutrient intake. I will take me till 9, and even then I'm going to be quick, but you can have them after that, Jay. They're all yours. I'm sizing them up for you for the good stuff. So, we have a huge problem, the industrialization of food. It's not even a conspiracy anymore. We're allowed to talk about it. The Christmas Day lecture this year by Dr. Chris von Tonneken, if any of you watched it, was all about ultra-processed food. He wrote an incredible book called Ultra-Processed People. I would encourage you all to read it. He's been teaching your kids about medicine and health for the past 15 years on daytime TV, and he's actually a phenomenal researcher and a surgeon, and he wrote an incredible book, and he was one of the guest lecturers at the Royal Society for this Christmas lecture, and it was all about ultra-processed food. You can still go and watch it on download BBC. Food system is broken, and ultra-processed food is at the heart of most of the problems that we face from a health point of view. And so we know there are tons of deficiencies, even vitamin C, which everyone knows about vitamin C. You go talk about vitamin C, yeah, I know about that, but it's a common deficiency. people don't get enough because they don't eat those leafy greens, they don't eat a sufficient amount of fruit, and so they don't get enough. But we've got about 1 billion people with a vitamin D deficiency. That's catastrophic because vitamin D is a primary agent in your body's immune response. And so if it's not there or there's insufficient, you have a delay in the response, and that has typically poor outcomes. B9, which is critical during pregnancy, we have a deficiency. 75% of pregnant women in Norway have suboptimal intake of iodine. The reason I mention that is typically people get that through fish-based diet. Everyone thinks the Norwegians are great at it, and they're not. We have deficiencies in iron, vitamin A, and iodine across the board. Globally, 17.3% of people are at risk of a vitamin zinc deficiency. And anemia, iron B12, affects 43% of children under the age of 5. We've got huge vitamin deficiencies across the globe. And why? Because the food doesn't contain any nutrients. And so we have two versions of this, Extend and Extend Plus. Everyone thinks, and I told you at the start, that I joined Zinzino because of balance oil. It's not true. Balance oil caught my attention. I realized how genius the product was. People use the term genius all the time. It's become a vacuous term. But balance oil is genius. They rebound fish oil with polyphenols, which is how they appear in nature. The polyphenol acts as a chaperone, protects it from the first pass, protects it against oxidation. Polyphenol is a primary prebiotic, so it feeds the gut, enables that omega-3 to be functional at a cellular level. It's a genius product. It's really simple, and all you got to do is tip enough of this into there, neck it, and it's done. Dead simple. Really simple. It is genius. But when I was taught nutrition, I had an incredible professor, and I remember our first lecture. This is a long, long, long time ago because I'm talking about my undergrad, not my master's or PhD or any of that stuff. And he said, the vast majority of multivitamins are expensive pee. That's what they are. They're just thrown together, sell them cheap or expensive, make some money, they don't do anything. And I always use that as my litmus paper when looking at supplements and supplement companies, whether I was head of performance for a rugby team or with Olympic athletes or whatever it was. It was always like, the multivitamin, is it any good? And it was when I looked at this that I went, wow, if a company is prepared to put this amount of research and effort into this type of formulation for a multivitamin, then they are genuinely taking this seriously. Because the easy thing to do is to not do this. Because most people don't even question it. Chuck enough vitamin C, D, talk about RDAs, and someone will buy it and they'll never test. Interestingly, we're going to bring out a test for this so you'll know what it does. But this is arguably the most advanced immune supplement in the world. Because it's not just about total amounts, it's about synergy. And even in this, we have beta-glucans. And then when we go to Extend Plus means it's all naturally derived. Extend means that we use synthetics. Why do we do that? Believe it or not, when it comes to intolerances, people are more likely to have an intolerance against a natural than a synthetic. And so we cover both bases. We have a synthetic version, only a couple of them, but they are, so we can't call it a plus. This one is all naturally derived. And it has these beta-glucans in. What do they do, good people? Beta-glucan to your immune system is like a nettle leaf to your leg. So it prompts a response, because to have circulating nutrients is great, but what we want is for those nutrients to be functional. We want them to be absorbed and taken up by the cell. And those beta-glucans, they just give a little bit of an aggravation to the immune function that says, right then, let's draw down these nutrients because we've got a little bit of a job to do. And so your body not only absorbs these, but it also puts them to use. So it's an entirely different functionality. It's really, really clever. And I don't know if any of you know Paul Clayton, but he's like the long-time serving science person at Zinzino. He's a phenomenal guy. And whenever we talk about reformulation of Extend, he just says, don't take out the beta-glucans. Don't take out the beta-glucans. Do what you want, but don't take out the beta-glucans. Because that's really what gives it a huge part of its functionality. And then we have tons in it. There are tons in it. People talk about it, but actually you see all these RDAs, and what I want to point out is we've got 200% and 150%, but we've also got 30% and 50%. And the reason being is that you want to bring about a synergy. So you want to bring out a synergy of things that work together and not a cluster, because your body will draw down the one that it thinks it most needs and bypass the others. But if you put them and stack them in a certain way, and then you add those beta-glucans, then the body will draw it all down. And it's good for your immune system, your nervous system, your psychological function, your cognitive function, your brain, your muscles. All of this works on multiple platforms of the human organism. And so these deficiencies can literally be ruled out by taking a sufficient amount on a daily basis. Good habits. Drink that oil. Add a bit of powder to water. Drink it at any point in the day you want, maybe before a meal. And then take 2 to 4 extend per day to make sure there is sufficient amount of vitamins and minerals to address your body's essential functions. When you look across the board of what's contained across all three, we would never say this replaces a diet. It's a supplement. It supports your diet. It supports your lifestyle. I want you to make really good dietary choices. I want you to stop getting your burgers from places that have golden arches. I don't want you to get chicken off a kernel given to you in a bucket. I want you to avoid things that are wrapped and packed, that are washed in chlorine. I want you to make the best choices you can. But to have a solid, stable habit that is measurably, quantifiably guaranteed to change your health status, just do 1, 2, and 3. It's as simple as that. It's ecologically, economically, and ethically sustainable and measurably effective. And it is literally, by the way, EFSA are the people who kind of govern what it is we're allowed to say about supplements, and we only ever say what we're allowed to say. Every single claim on there is EFSA approved around everything I've just talked to you about. That's the European Food Standards Authority. And so we can literally enhance and transform human wellness in 3 simple daily steps. And that is everything. And I finished just after 9, which, given the fact we didn't start till 10 past and you told me 2 hours, I'm bang on time. But before I leave you in the capable hands of Jay, I do have to give you a notification. First of all, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got some information from it. I hope it was useful. I hope it helped you to make some decisions for yourself and maybe the people around you. Thank you for listening. Paul Clayton, the person I spoke about, who is remarkable, will be in Liverpool on Thursday, February the 6th, which kind of means I'll probably pop across to see him as well, because he lives in America, and then we bring him across and he tours around Europe occasionally. So I'll probably come across and listen to him speak then. If you can, I would encourage you to be here. Paul has been a leading light. Put it this way, Paul's got a few summers on me, and when I was studying my undergrad, we were getting taught about the kind of stuff that Paul was teaching about. So we're going back a long way. He's such a prominent voice in the world of health and nutrition. So come along to that. And then for those people who are really keen, he'll be down in London as well on Sunday, February the 9th. So Paul is coming over. I would encourage you to listen to Paul. He's a phenomenal guy. And as I wrap up, I've said a lot, probably too much. If you've got any last questions, I can literally take 3 questions max, and then we're going to let Jay have the floor. At the back of the room.
What's your position on the carnivore diet where they're not taking in any dietary fibers or any other nutrients? So I went to Keto Brain Conference up in Manchester before Christmas. Listened to Zoe Harcum and lots of the keto audience, community for brain health, and it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. So yeah, I was just wondering what your position is on that.
Keto is an interesting one. And in extreme circumstances, you can get some measurably extreme outcomes with keto. And there have been some trials, one that actually I worked around but wasn't directly involved in, that looked at glioblastoma, which is a brain tumor, and saw some really encouraging and convincing outcomes. But then you can come down into this notion of keto and carnivore as a daily. So first of all, there's the practical aspect of it. I don't think for the majority of people it's sustainable. And I actually don't think that there's been any really quantifiably impressive data that has said this is the way everybody should eat. and much of the narrative around it actually falls apart. There's this old-fashioned narrative that they like to refer to where they say, this is how people ate. There's no evidence for that. If you have a look at the anthropology of our own species and all the evidence we have as to how we evolved and how we ate, we've never been purely carnivore. That's just not been our legacy whatsoever. And also, I think it's unnecessarily restrictive. When you do food well, and you look at variety, and you look at like multiple mechanisms of nutrient availability, that's where you see the most prosperous outcomes. And so to me, I think that, where it warrants further investigation is its application in extreme circumstances. I've literally been front seat row on a medical trial where I saw it literally prolong life and save life in the context of stage 4 glioblastoma. But the long-term legacy of that is that the patients who underwent that trial then further down the road returned to a normalized diet. So I think that's a key indicator that's often not discussed. I think it has its place. It's interesting. I don't think it's ever going to be the way that will encourage the world to eat.
Any more questions, guys?
We can have 2 more. Anything you want as long as it's sport and nutrition.
How important is the VO2 max?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned it at the beginning, but is that quite an important thing to focus on?
It is actually, yeah. I mean, this talk hasn't been about that, but if I can indulge myself a minute, 100%, efficiency, aerobic efficiency, how well your heart and lungs interact with the system is phenomenal. And as we age, our VO2 max naturally declines, so you've got to work harder to keep it. And it's if you look at any medical paper, if you look at any lifestyle wellness paper, the higher your VO2 max, the lower your risk of all NCDs, better your quality of life, and also longer, like when we look at longevity. VO2 is a key indicator optimizing health and wellness. Got one more?
If you're taking the Zenzino supplements, obviously, the women's health, you take all the magnesium, glycinate, and D3 and K2. Do you take that alongside the Zenzino, or would you not take that anymore and stick to that?
I mean,
Adequate amounts?
yeah, you do, yeah. So you're going to get vitamin D in Extend, you're going to get vitamin D in Balance Oil. So it's there in those 2. We actually have a product called XenoShine, which is a targeted vitamin D. And we do a vitamin D test. And that's if you need to adjust. But we always did that as a separate because actually most people get enough from the standard product. But if at certain times of year, like this time of year, there's no UVB, so you're not synthesizing it through exposure to the sun, you can manage that around. And that's D3 because you probably know D3 is the one that's most easily metabolized. And then you've got K2 in it. But by the way, there's a myth around K2 and vitamin D. High dose vitamin D, which is what we manage in hospitals, necessitates K2. You've got to have a K2 supplement with it as well. But standard regular dose vitamin D doesn't. You mean it's good to have K2, and the K2 is widely available in the diet. We've got K2 in both aspects of Extend, but you don't have to have it with vitamin D. It's far better actually to take a magnesium with a vitamin D than it is a K2 to stabilize it. Yeah. So yeah. So I'd encourage people. To me, I don't like people to. Sorry, Jay. I don't like people to rattle. I don't want to ever turn the world. When I was a kid, there was a program on TV called Space 1999. I don't know if you remember it. I never want anyone to live like that. I want people to eat food, and I want that to be the cornerstone of their diet. But I also want people to get real about the problem. And to me, 3 simple steps is dead easy. And then you can cover that. And then where there are cases of need that need a bit more, then we offer that. But this is the staple of what we do. Is that all 3 questions?
One more.
Yeah, I've got the guy in the red hoodie.
But mine was similar to the vitamin D one, just because I'd heard that the doses, people have had benefits at like 4,000 IU, like really high doses, but I just didn't know it because I noticed it was like 20 IU.
Yeah, I mean, that high dose vitamin D is typically where there's a problem. And so you high dose it for a period of time. And I'm always interested with vitamin D, and I don't know if there's any medical people in the room, any doctors, but vitamin D is an interesting one for me because it's estimated now there's about 1 billion people in the world who've got a vitamin D deficiency. And whenever you talk about it, you'll typically have a doctor or someone who'll say, but you can take too much. And you go, yeah, but that's not the problem. At no point is it being reported anywhere that we've got this huge problem of people having too much vitamin D. You can have too much water, you'll drown. You can have too much of anything. But the reality is that the body can tolerate higher doses for a short period of time, but vitamin D toxicity is really serious, and it can lead to really kind of breakdown of certain types of organ and tissue. So you should not high dose for a long period of time. It should be acute, and probably in the context of the fact that your body's dealing with something. Otherwise, consistency is key, and it's making sure you got a sufficient amount every day of the week rather than high dosing. Last one.
So most vitamins and minerals, Colin, obviously most people are deficient in a large variety of vitamins and minerals. Why is that? Why should people be bothered about that? Like, what does it mean to a human being to be low in vitamins and minerals?
Well, I apologise if I've not emphasised that in the talk. I'll do it now. I'll make this. I do this way all the time, so indulge me whilst I do it one more. Imagine now, I ask you to write your autobiography. You're going to write me the story of your life. I want to know everything, from your early years to your school times, to your best friends, to the people you hate, your favourite music, your love of your life, the people who broke your heart, everything. Okay, you're going to tell me the story of your life. But you can't use any word with the letters A, B, C, D, E, K, or O. Okay? How effectively are you going to tell your story? How easy will it be to tell your story? Vitamins and minerals are the letters of the alphabet with which your body communicates. Ultimately, everything goes back, and I don't mean to offend anyone who's religious, the two go together, kind of. Everything goes back to biochemistry. And certainly we do. Everything goes back to biochemistry and biochemical sequences. And those biochemical sequences rely on all those things, those vitamins, those minerals. And if they're not there, there's a breakdown in communication. And breakdown in communications never work out for the best. Even if it's a case of, let me put it really simple, say you get a cold. And if you had sufficient amount of nutrients, your cold will come and go in 3 to 4 days. And without them, you'll have a cold for 3 weeks. It's like this thing that's going around at the minute, the 60-day cough. And people go, yeah, 60-day cough. And I'm going, what, you accepting that? That's ludicrous. Everyone's like, yeah, it's a 60-day cough. You know why? Because you're all knackered. That's why you're getting a 60-day cough. The body shouldn't, people die 60 days dealing with something. But we just normalize everything. And it's all down to these deficiencies. And we see it everywhere. And we're so familiar with sickness and illness now that we just accept it. And we just go, yeah, that's just how it is. And I am going to finish, Jay, I promise you. Even the common cold one tickles me. Like, how often do you really think you should get a common cold? I'd say once every 2 or 3 years. You know what I mean? Really? But I know people go, oh, yeah, they normally get 3 or 4. A year? How long have you been living on the planet? You should have built up antibodies by now. And it's just because people are ticking away with this low-level immunological response, and it's just inefficient. And then we had the huge big warning that came our way in 2020, and everyone said, this is terrible, we won't let this happen again. Watch this space. So, vitamins and minerals are essential, and we've spent nearly 100 years pulling them out of diet. And we're paying the price for it now, in the state of our health. Right, I can see you getting angry because you want to ask your question, so yours is the last question, and then I'm going home. I've got about an hour's drive. Go for it.
Obesity rate.
Obesity rate.
Right, you have an issue.
Go on.
I'm challenging you on 1.4 billion adults are insufficiently active.
Yeah.
Challenging you on, I would imagine that it'd be higher than 1.4 billion.
No, but
if we have such an obesity rate.
No, because there's a lot of obese people who are active. So no, the two don't go hand in hand. And also, what we're talking about is 1.4 billion adults who don't meet the minimum. That's 1.4 billion people who don't meet the minimum recommendation. There's a double that group for the people who don't do anything at all. So that's 1.4 billion who don't do the minimum of what we ask them to do. It's a huge number. I mean, if you're going to get into, obesity rates are increasing, but like, the thing is 1.4 billion adults insufficiently active is what you're talking about is it's approaching a quarter of the entire population of the planet don't move enough. And then when you look at where there's population density, if you look at places like India and you look at China and you look at Africa, who are in different contexts, whether you're inner city or suburban, then you've got entirely different ways of life. So you're going to write off the board nearly 3.5, 4 billion already. So then you're left with this population here, and that 1.4 billion is from them. And they're from people who are living the same kind of lives of us, Western Europe, North America, Australia, those kind of places. 1.4 billion people. Adults. So that's not the children, it's 18 plus. Not moving enough. But they're the statistics that come, latest statistics through the WHO as an estimate. There could be more. There could be more. And the reason why there might be more is because of what I went back to before, which is your positive bias. And people who always think they're doing better than they are. And it depends on how far you interrogate and investigate someone. And a lot of people, and I do it all the time, I go, do you get your 10,000 steps? They go, yep. And then they go and sit down. So it could be. Who knows? It might be 2 billion. It might be 3 billion. But based off that survey, because no one's literally there watching them, going, right, you're okay. It could be low enough. But I still think it's a staggering amount. Staggering amount. We've lost sight of 1 billion, haven't we? This is where I'll end, Jay. Promise you. So, we live in this world now. Everyone wants to be a billionaire. You know what? I think the first thing that should happen is if you say you want to be a billionaire, you should be put in prison. Because no one ever becomes a billionaire ethically. If you were to save up to be a millionaire, and you were to save £1 per second to become a millionaire now, I think the average rate is £1 per second. I think it'd take you, I think it's something like, don't quote me exactly, it's somewhere, it would take you around about 12 days to get to that. To save up at the same rate to be a billionaire, it'd take you 31 years. No one needs 1 billion. 1 billion is a big old number. It's a huge chunk of people. It really is. It's a huge chunk of people. It's enormous. So we've got to get back. We've got to get our head around the statistics. The problem we've got now is we've got Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all these people and go, we're worth 400 billion. Ooh, so that's how much you've got to have to be rich. That's how much you've got to have to be a bastard. And you can Twitter that and tell Elon I said it as well. Gobshite. Right, folks, I am going to hand over to Jay. Big round of applause to Jay. Thank you for listening. It was a privilege. Thank you very much, Booker.